the data is available, just the way can we actually go get it? And can we make it available in a way that could bring more automation, more intelligent, and make it at scale without having to depend on suppliers to come to a portal or having customers to maintain information? Could we do this? And that was the big question. Could we actually do it in a way that would be trusted enough, enough information, easily consumed by our customers to be to have a commercial, to be commercially viable?
Welcome, everyone, to the Tech Business Roundtable podcast show. It is a podcast show dedicated to shining a spotlight on tech innovators, entrepreneurs, founders, and the compelling narratives behind the movements they've established. I'm your host, Ryan Davies, and I'm hosting today's discussion on revolutionizing procurement with trusted supplier data with Stephanie Lapierre. Stephanie, thank you so much for joining today.
Well, thank you for having me.
Really excited to kind of dive into this episode, Stephanie. I don't know we could find somebody, quite so strong in this area. You're the founder, CEO of Tealbook, which is a highly coveted supply chain company, and she is extremely well thought of as a thought leader and one of the most influential minds in emerging data technologies. She has been recognized as one of the top 100 most influential women in supply chain, and her company, Tealbook, has been both named a top 50 company by Spend Matters and won the Cool Vendor Award by Gartner. Prior to Tealbook, Stephanie spent 10 years building a successful strategic sourcing and procurement consulting firm that focuses on large-scale sourcing optimization projects. And, given her experience and visibility into data issues crippling procurement, she has made it her mission to deliver a trusted source of supplier data to an ever-growing e-procurement space. So currently, Tealbook is the only big data company that provides a self-enriching, self-maintaining mechanism that kind of fixes that gap and fix the enterprise supplier data issue permanently. So I think diving into that, what I'd love to know is sharing a little bit about your journey into the procurement and supply chain industry and what inspired you to start Tealbook.
Yeah, well, no one grows up thinking they want to be in procurement. Everyone has its own story of how they landed, but what I do find is the people that are landing in procurement, stay in procurement, really love what they do. They really love the function and the opportunity to have such a horizontal view in the entire organization. My journey in procurement sort of also felt a bit by accident. About 16 years ago, my oldest daughter is 16, so I always know when this started for me. I was pregnant with her, and I decided to just write down the things that I love. And there's always a point in everyone's career where, I have a chance to reflect, like, what gives me energy? What do I want to focus my time on? And I felt that was a pretty, sort of blessed opportunity in my late 20s to make that sort of leap in deciding to launch my first business, which was a consulting firm. And the initial premise of that consulting firm was to help match companies, our enterprise, with innovative suppliers that solved similar challenges for other businesses, or bring suppliers together to brainstorm and help solve business challenges. And that was pretty broad, but it was intentional. I want to be able to solve business challenges with innovation. And so, pre-social media, I am in my mid-40s. So before Facebook and LinkedIn, I had sent an email to a lot of my contacts, which at the time was mostly pharmaceutical, and got a first, call within 4 hours with someone saying, like, hey, I heard that you guys could help us, achieve. At the time, they were looking for an innovative company to launch this MS drug in a really competitive space. And so, and I was like, oh, we would love to. And so that was the start of that business. That business, I still own it. I don't operate it anymore, but it's been profitable on the first year. And this was, to me, a validation that there was a need for information in the market with businesses that had challenges. It could have been packaging, it could have been serialization, it could have been in this case in patient support, it could be in clinical trials, it could be in marketing, and a lot of desire to find partners that could bring innovation to business. So anyway, that company was called Matchbook. Over time, what ended up happening is my clients start seeing this process that we had put in place to look very similar to sourcing. And back in 2007, sourcing was still fairly native as a function of procurement. And what my client had seen is that what we were doing was very much in alignment with what the business needed, but it was a way that procurement wanted to shift to driving more value for the business. And so I was asked to help bridge the gap between the business and procurement and help build and formalize this function being strategic sourcing. And so my consulting firm did that for a few years, working with large companies who had SAP, Ariba at the time. Coupa was still fairly new at the time. And SideQuest was sort of, the pre-Jagger days. And then a lot of my contacts ended up going to smaller companies that were raising a lot of capital, and they were launching their first, in this case, again, in biotech space, their first commercial product. And suddenly they needed everything, like literally grout. Like they needed, to build their entire commercial infrastructure. And so suddenly I was getting calls for like, I need X, Y, and Z. So what started as being a bit more reactive to help those customers source for suppliers ended up looking at, there's a very similar path to all these companies looking for the same things, but they're all doing the same enormous amount of work for sourcing, negotiating, et cetera. And so that spiraled the idea of building procurement functions for these fast growing companies. And could we do it better? Could we do it where it's enabling, it's transparent, it's scalable? And, with this amazing, admirable goal, what we found is as soon as we start introducing systems and tools, they required quality data. We would put the quality data in the system, and then it would start decaying. And then you depended on suppliers, on people, on services to keep the information up to date. And suddenly you quickly lost visibility. You quickly lost transparency. It took an enormous amount of swivel chair and manual work to continue having, this transparency and this scale. And then I start seeing the same path. Like we're going to go into the same challenges that large organizations have. And the more technology are going to be introduced to the market, because that was inevitable, and we're seeing that now, the harder it would be to scale a technology ecosystem if you don't have good data. And so to me, for 9 years, I fought the concept of building Tealbook because I had successful consulting business, doing 40% margin. I have 3 kids. I was like, I don't need to take on this tech crazy idea. But in every case that I work with companies, if they had this data solution that would be agnostic to their systems, all that they're trying to achieve would be so much easier, because a lot of the work in procurement processes that are there to collect information or process information in the desire or the need to make a decision or exchange with a supplier, that's payment or contract. And so I just saw, there's a huge opportunity to solve this data gap. And what I start also seeing is that companies spend not only millions to hundreds of millions to billions of dollars, depending on the size of the company, of dollars exchanged with suppliers for their goods and services, but there's also millions to hundreds of millions of dollars in the management of these relationships. Like every supplier needs to be sourced, right? Every supplier will go through some kind of RFP or negotiation and will be onboarded into the system, will be paid. And so if you think of a company that has 5,000, 25,000, 100,000, 150,000 suppliers, think about the amount of money that goes to these relationships. And if you ask any organization, basic things like, how many suppliers do you have? They don't know, right? How much spend in certain category, and how does that benchmark with other vertical? How many suppliers do you have in Russia that could be impacted by the war that we saw last year, by disruption? How many of your suppliers are small and diverse? How many of your suppliers and your spend goes to sustainable businesses? They don't know.
Yeah.
And to know, it requires so much effort and time and manual work that they're investing more, and they still don't have quality information. Anyway, so all of that, more to it, but that ended up that 8 years ago, I decided to finally take the leap, start seeing the adoption of cloud technology becoming more mainstream, which was needed. I start seeing the opportunity with big data, which was still very new back then. Like we're now AI, everybody knows AI. 8 years ago was still a very new technology that not a lot of people understood and were a bit scared of it. But it required that to build this vision. And so 8 years ago, I decided to take the leap and start building what ended up being a massive puzzle.
Yeah, I was going to say that is it's a lot of it sounds like a massive puzzle, but one of those ones where you're trying to do it upside down sometimes, right? So you don't even have a picture to work off of. You're just trying to go off of shapes and piece them together and bring things, right?
Well, the first shape was like, let's build a LinkedIn for suppliers, which in traditional thinking, it makes a lot of sense. Like, we'll build this software, we'll invite the suppliers to come and own their profile, we'll make the experience really good, like LinkedIn, and then we'll enable the same information to be available and distributed across all customers. And what we found out, like everybody else, is that suppliers won't come, not fast enough, not enough, because they have 500 other marketplace and software and portal to update, and the information needed to be accessible to our customers faster. And what we saw is that we started buying like data from Dun & Bradstreet and other sources to try to populate this profile, but the data was so bad with no visibility into what was good or what was bad, that we ended up deciding, hey, there's a different way. And luckily for me, I had met a CTO that had been at Ariba for 10 years prior to going back to school to study big data, machine learning, and AI. And so he introduced me to like this most like magic moment of like, we can actually, the data is everywhere. There's so much information, and businesses want you to know about them. So it's not like my own private information or my kids' information that I want to protect. There's some that you may not want your customers to know, but for the most part, you want to make yourself marketable, and you update so many different database for different compliance reasons. The data is available, just the way can we actually go get it? And can we make it available in a way that could bring more automation, more intelligent, and make it at scale without having to depend on suppliers to come to a portal or having customers to maintain information? Could we do this? And that was the big question. Could we actually do it in a way that would be trusted enough, enough information, easily consumed by our customers to be marketed, to have a commercial, to be commercially viable? And that was it was a sort of the second chapter, like the second chapter of Teal. But first chapter being sort of the LinkedIn for suppliers, the second chapter being like, hey, I think we can use AI and start using big data to start collecting this information, make sense of it, and creating these digital profiles that we felt we could enrich, we could increase the coverage, we can improve the quality over time. And then there's many other chapters after this, but these were the two first chapters of the business.
And I think that solves a lot of, or at least touches on, some of those common challenges and pain points that businesses are facing trying to manage their supplier data, right? Because that is obviously a huge obstacle. And your experience, like you said, you've seen a lot of outdated, inaccurate supplier data. What kind of impact does that have in terms of the procurement processes, business operations, obviously a cost impact on top of that? It sounds so exponential, right? Yeah.
And the reason I'm so passionate, even 8 years later, with all, the what comes with building a tech company from scratch, is that at the time I couldn't believe why CFOs and CEOs didn't care. Because if you're spending all this money on these relationships and you're not able to optimize it, well, you have an asset that you're untapping that could be huge amount of levers to achieve your goals, that it's improving your margin, that it's to, reduce your risk, that it's to be able to scale faster, to access innovation, to achieve your ESG targets. We're talking like even to be able to enable sales to build pipeline with your suppliers and negotiate better with customers based on balance of trades. Like, there's so many opportunities.
Yeah.
And it really takes someone to kind of think through, a supplier, third party, like a company that we do business with, who touches that company? And if you start thinking of all the functions that touch that company and what they're doing right now to get information about that same supplier, which is all disparate, they're all doing this in silo. And how good is the information that finance or procurement or other teams can leverage to optimize that investment? It's crazy. And so that's what motivated me. The blockers, we could go, the use cases are so endless, but if we take baseline, there's always a catalyst for someone to say, this is unacceptable, we need better data. So some of our customers would have been, one of our clients where the CEO came and said, how much money are we spending with this other big supplier? And the procurement team didn't know the answer. And they had 36 instances of the same company, and they couldn't get the answer on time for the meeting with the CEO. And the CEO also asked, hey, if you could get me, how much money are we spending with them, or are they spending with us, so that we have both sort of trade? and they couldn't get the AR data. So they couldn't actually effectively give the information. And it's like, we're useless. Like we were not able to empower CEO in a really important negotiation because we didn't have access to the information. Like that's embarrassing. And then they start building their own data infrastructure 5 years ago, which is really hard to do on your own. So, but they did, and now they're partnering with us to accelerate their investment. So that's like a catalyst moment. There's a lot of those. In their case, even once they start getting visibility, they realized they had something like 16 contracts across the business with the same supplier. So having visibility of these contracts enabled them to consolidate from about $1.4 million in spend to about $270,000 because these were just good for the supplier. They're able to negotiate a bunch of different contracts at different pricing. But when you're an enterprise and you're trying to maximize your capital, right? And you're that's just one example. So you probably have thousands of examples like that you're not properly optimizing that capital because your company made decisions without knowing. And then you go into the raw cost of just, we have a client who was describing just to get spend reporting, just to have the confidence to know how much money are we spending by category, by suppliers, by commodity, et cetera. And it takes about $1.5 million a year in raw costs just to achieve confidence of spend reporting that's recurring. This is work that's being done very manually every 2 weeks for them to have this report. And the spend is about $1.5 million. And the confidence is good. It's not great. And so now you're talking about a raw basic cost of like buying third-party data, having CDAs reviewing files, waiting to get the vendor master exporter from your financial systems, like a huge amount of manual work. Another layer to this would be the investment you've made in your source to pay or all your system that require good quality data, because the ROI promise on those systems assumes that you have good quality data in those systems. And so, time to value with clients who bought modules like SLP from Ariba that's been sitting on the shelf for 6, 7, 8 months, and they spent $500,000 on a module that's useless, right? Until it's implemented with quality information.
Yeah.
And then once you implement it, how are you driving compliance? If you're waiting for suppliers to populate their profile and people to leverage the information that they need to do the work, then you're losing a lot of money and time, value. So then think about that technology stack. What does that look like? Which of your system need good data? And if they're all operating in disparate silos, how much work is it to maintain? So huge loss. And then all the business outcome, like from a spending, to what's the cost of not seeing your supply base and being susceptible to risk, to, not hitting your ESG target, especially if you've announced to your shareholder, or you've got some, debt maybe that are dependent on you spending X amount with sustainable, we're talking like it's hundreds of millions of dollars.
Yeah.
All around, the simplicity of understanding who you do business with, which should be a no-brainer. You should know who you do business with at scale, not just the 20% that you spend more money with, because the rest is where you have the most risk, the most change, the best pool of innovation. These are the small, diverse businesses that are innovating, the startups that are innovating, the diverse companies that are thinking differently about your business and your challenges. And you don't know it, you don't see it. And those are the hardest companies to engage if you're depending on them to come to a portal. Any company, and there's a big sort of still, I think, expectation, or some people are still living in the land of, because we are this brand name, suppliers will come to our portal. I guarantee you it will not happen. You think of the Ariba who spent millions and millions of dollars trying to get the suppliers to come to their network, and they had the biggest market share. SAP, I think, has about 100,000 suppliers that touch their profile regularly out of millions of companies that transact. And that's because they may come once to be onboarded, but the chance of them coming back over and over again. And then there's all this other data that the suppliers, like, how do they benchmark against other companies from a pricing perspective? Or, where does money coming and going from? Which companies are more at risk? They're losing market share. Like, there's all an entire other layer that the supplier couldn't provide in a portal. And so how much visibility do you have on your tier 2, your scope 3, your tiering visibility? Like, none.
Yeah. It's a snowball effect, like you said, right? And it kind of becomes that it's this monster that continues to grow as you get bigger and you get more suppliers and more happening here. It becomes harder and harder to keep track of. You've kind of already touched a little bit about the risk of not having a procurement strategy or team in place that's, responsible for this. But a lot of our audience is, emerging companies, founders, growing companies. What's your advice to them for, hey, get ahead of this now, because this is what could happen. And again, like you said, you're costing yourself time, money, resources, getting the best pricing, whatever it is. What kind of advice do you have for standing up a strategy for them early stage, or how to jump into it if they're almost a little too late already in their mind?
Well, so you get the early who are listening to me going like, we know the problem from the sell side. We hate procurement. We hate updating portals. And there's no benefit to helping us grow our business. It's a roadblock. It takes a lot of resources. These freaking RFPs that take 300 questions. So I know, and I sympathize with that. I do think that companies, larger enterprise, having visibility into their supplier base. And there's an example where we work with a large bank. One of the use cases, understanding your small, diverse businesses, because when you have 100,000 suppliers, how do you know who's women owned, black owned, LGBTQ owned, veteran owned? It's really hard. And so our data is able to surface and match the right entity. And so this large bank, they look at all their legal spend, and they saw firms that were women owned, that the spend over quarter was staying the same. And so they decide to shift some of their contract with the big law firm to the smaller women-owned firms. And they told them ahead of time, hey, do you have the bandwidth? We would like to send more contract your way so that we can help you scale. And we would like you to invite you to talk to other small businesses to learn how to work with companies like ours, because we're complicated and we're highly regulated. And so that changed that company's life.
Yeah.
Their employees, their families, their community. It's just so powerful. And so anyway, there's a whole side that I sympathize with that. And if we could make it easier by pre-populating information so that you don't have to go through a portal to put your website and your location, just basic stuff that should just be there, or automate your certificate and all your customer systems so that you don't have to do it. Lots of efficiencies. On the buy side, companies often ask me, when is it the right time? And I was just actually talking to a CEO of a biotech company this morning, and we're in 16 sectors. So it just happens to be a friend that has raised a lot of money that contacted me. And, when you're early stage like this, it's speed. It has nothing to do with savings, but in a market like us right now, where capital is expensive, right? You need to stretch your runway, most likely. You need to operate more efficiently, because that commands better valuation in the market. Well, you need to figure out how to operate more efficiently. And so if you're buying, if you don't buy, if your spend is people, probably not as relevant. But if you are buying and you're highly dependent on suppliers, providers for goods and services, that's where it becomes, there's a lot of inefficiencies in the way that you're sourcing. Even if it's your stakeholders and not procurement sourcing, they may be signing things that they shouldn't be signing if they don't have some kind of guardrails or education or policies or processes in place. You are probably taking too long to bring legal in to get contract reviews. You're probably taking too long to onboard the supplier, or you're not onboarding them properly, which will cause issues in the future. And there's a whole pile of things that are not efficient. If you get a chance to establish, and I call it, early stage companies don't like the word procurement because it sounds like they're just cost saving centers and they're getting, they're more roadblocks. What we used to call it when I built procurement function was how do you capitalize or optimize your capital more efficiently, right? And so it was it's almost like outsourcing operations in some ways, right? And so and what we would start with is mapping out what's the roadmap, what type of suppliers do you have right now to get a good baseline on your spend? Who are those suppliers? What's the process right now of having the information available in what system? If you already have some systems, can we get a good baseline? Once you get a good baseline, it's easier to build a plan or strategy. And then when you start to look at, future looking, what suppliers are we going to need? How are we going to make it easier on our employees to access the suppliers that they need to do their job? How do we make it easier for suppliers to come into the process, to work with us, to become customer of choice? How do we get more visibility into what they're supposed to deliver so that they're compliant to their contract? How do we optimize those relationships more effectively and faster so that we don't have to go back to the well every time someone needs a supplier? They don't need to go to Google and call Bob, and then introduce Bob to the organization unnecessarily. And they do this today because they can't see that there's maybe 400 other suppliers that are under contract that provides the same goods and services. So how do we start better with a fresher perspective? And my very biased view is having a good data foundation is the first pillar. And most companies like, oh, we're not mature enough. No, it's like buying a house because you love the kitchen and you think the house is beautiful, but if the house is sitting on a swamp and has no good foundation,
Right.
like you're going to have to, it's going to be really expensive and really hard to pick up that house, build the foundation versus, making sure that you have a very strong foundation, then freaking build the house that you want with all the, the premium taps and the tiles and stuff like that. But it's the same when you're thinking about your stack. If you can start with a better way to automate information on who you do business with, that will enable analytics. You should have analytics, right? You should have a BI, Tableau or Power BI or whatever. Centralize that. And then when you're ready to buy either ERP, if you don't have one yet, or your source to pay system, or you want a sourcing tool, or you want a contract management system, or you want a third-party risk management system, or you want a sustainability solution, or if you have a data foundation that can deliver consistent, high quality, under governance information across those systems, then it's just a matter of plug and playing. Like the time to value of implementing that solution, the compliance driven that solution. There's another solution that comes out that has better chat GPT AI or whatever that you want to leverage. You can actually change it. You're not locked into like massive implementation and this change management to have your suppliers coming to a portal and all of that. So there's a lot of efficiency gain to look at how do you not redo what we did in the past and build these Frankenstein architecture. Can you actually do it in a way that scales and provide a much more flexible, interchangeable, and high value ecosystem? And one more thing to say to this is that if you have a data foundation, if your company already has a data lake of any kind, if you have BI tool, and anything that you're going to implement has a feedback loop, you're going to make your organization more intelligent. The same information that sales need or finance need or compliance or third-party risk, or that on the buy side you need from sales or from finance or from third-party risk or other function, will make the organization more intelligent. If you build the way we've been building, which is I'm going to buy all these niche solutions and they're all going to have their data stack and I'm not going to have them consolidate other than swivel chair and flat file between system, you're going to never make your organization more intelligent. And so it's a huge opportunity for procurement to find better alignment with other function and really contribute to making the organization, more efficient, more sustainable, more scalable in ways that we couldn't do before. It just, the technology just wasn't there.
Yeah. And I think, again, you're talking to the, that thought of the silos to try and crumble down a little bit and have that unified front as opposed to that traditional way of, well, you're here and you're here and you're here and no one talks to each other. Everyone's running different systems. How are we supposed to know what each other's doing? You've touched on emerging data technologies, AI, big data, and how they're really shaping the future of procurement, supply chain management. But are there any other specific areas or technologies within that procurement, space that you find really exciting, promising? That's like, this is the revolution, that the next stage that's coming? Or are we still, and we get this a lot, AI, we're really just scratching the surface. So even what we think is coming, there could be another evolution to this that we never saw.
And then you'll be like, oh my God, look at the shiny object.
Yeah, right.
Even in last year, you think of Chat GPT and then suddenly intake orchestration. Intake orchestration is not new. Like, to have employees buy better, faster. That's what the Amazon of the world have built, right? A way for people to consume, especially access commodities. If they need a pen or laptop or whatever, they should be able to buy that pretty quickly. So what I'd say is just thread carefully. Like, it's exciting. It's a bit overwhelming. There's so many exciting technologies. My view, and that's because I've been talking to a lot of CIOs and CPOs that have more of a tech sort of mindset or operating mindset, is that rather than buying all these niche solutions quickly and then depending on them for analytics and depending on them for their own version of a chat bot or a Gen AI tool, what you're going to create is most likely the same as we did with Portal, is a lot of disparity in how people are using these technologies. And they're going to train a bunch of large language models that sit in different solutions for different reasons, right? If there's a way for you to leverage your company's data lake. And if it's Azure, you can then leverage ChatGPT for businesses. Your company probably already put their name down to get a license. And procurement often says like, well, we're not prioritized by IT or the CIO for us to have use cases for us. But if you have actually a good data foundation fed into a data lake, and then you're able to start having use cases for AI that are really easy, that don't demand a lot of resources from IT, you can leverage those licenses. That's what IT wants you to do. So I say, just be careful to get excited to use chatbot. Or some of our customers have asked us, when are you going to have a Gen AI? We use large language model in our development to increase efficiencies of the work that we do. We are considering at some point potentially having, a smarter way for our customers to consume insight, because having trusted data would be a natural sort of extension. But we're not rushing into it because our clients are looking to centralize their solution. And it may be more of a mid-market. Like if they don't have the data lake, they don't have the BI tools yet, and they want to action that data faster, that could be an opportunity. But, listen, I use ChatGPT for my travels, for drafting copy, for all kinds of stuff. Like,
Yeah.
I actually use AI to do my latest headshots. And I gave the example when I was speaking at Amazon Business last week of, the headshot I did 3 years ago, which I was like, it's kind of outdated. Like 3 years ago is a long time, but that headshot was over $1,000 easily. It had, full day of makeup, hair, figuring out my outfits, going to a studio, spending the day, then, editing all the pictures. My last headshot was on the way back from the cottage with my kids in the car. I spent $25. I spent about 20 minutes, and I found one that was like, actually kind of looks like me. My kids approved it, and boom, it was done. Right. So there's all kinds of like use cases where like drafting an RFP, absolutely use ChatGPT to draft an RFP. Like you can edit it, you can make it better over time, but there are a lot of really good use cases. But when it comes to like really important insight for your team to deliver a broader set of use cases, like how much money am I spending with this supplier, or where are there opportunities to optimize some categories where I'm maybe not introducing enough competition, and who's more competitive, where I can use these levers to improve my savings targets, or like these are, unless you have good data that you can trust, like you can't just use the old, the web, and you have to be careful on what data you're using internally. And so, or what you're putting into a large language model that may not be approved by the company, you could put the company at risk, and that's really dangerous. So anyway, I just say, just educate yourself. Again, my biased view, start with data, everything else, then you can optimize it, you can try, you can pilot it. How many pilots have failed because the data is not there, and then they think it's the software, and it's just not the software. It's just, that's not effective until you actually have data. Right. So yeah, start with data first, then build, and then get excited. Like, there's a lot of cool stuff out there, but you don't want to be locked in. And these should not be anymore like long implementations and painful and costly, like, customization. Like, you don't need to do that anymore.
Incredible. I think that's some unbelievable, takeaways and advice for our to leave our audience with here, especially those involved in procurement, supply chain management, which again, for so much of our audience, this is something so critical and probably overlooked, or maybe not seeing the efficiencies that exist. With that in mind, for our audience, how can we learn more about Tealbook and get in contact with you to kind of learn more and help with making this a little bit easier in their lives and potentially their businesses run so much smoother?
Yeah, so obviously on our website, tealbook.com, you can follow me on LinkedIn or follow Tealbook on LinkedIn. I'm very active. I post a lot. And sometimes I apologize to people because I do post a lot on data and, and AI and digital transformation and procurement. Make sure you're interested in the topic. And then we're launching our next generation of our supplier data platform on February 1st. So we are preparing. So we're doing a lot of education right now, content, webinars, and things like that. So if you want to sign up, if you're interested in what's coming in the pipeline, better data quality, more scale, more data, more transparency, more control, all delivered through API into any of our customers' tools. It's a pretty exciting time, and so that's coming up soon. And depending on when this gets released, but February 1st is the soft launch, and we have 5 co-innovation customers that have partnered with us that are pretty big names, that have worked with us for the past year and a half to bring this technology to life. So it's a pretty exciting time for our company.
Incredible. Well, with that, I want to take a minute here to thank Stephanie for this amazing podcast, Revolutionizing Procurement with Trusted Supplier Data. And I want to thank our listeners. We cannot do what we do without you. So with that, thank you, Stephanie, so much for being here. I think there's plenty more that we could talk about. I hope to be able to have you back for some future episodes so we can dive deeper into many of those topics you just touched on.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan, for having me and listening to all this procurement talk.
I love it. This is fantastic. I can't wait to do it again. But until we meet again with another amazing TBR episode, I'm your host, Ryan Davies. Thanks. Take care out there, everyone.